All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. My name is Briana and I work in professional development at the association. I'm so glad you all could join us today for our session on burnout and boundaries. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mei Lin, the director of the IDEA Center for Public Gardens.
Thank you so much, Briana. Welcome, everyone. As Briana mentioned, my name is Mei Lin Plummer. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a member of the association's IDEA committee, but I'm also the director of the IDEA Center for Public Gardens. On behalf of the IDEA Center and the IDEA committee, I'm happy to co-facilitate today's IDEA Café on burnout and boundaries. This is our first IDEA Center sponsored cafe, and we look forward to supporting the IDEA committee to bring you more cafe topics. So we hope to bring you monthly discussions versus quarterly, as we have done in the past. We also want to invite you to reach out to the committee if you're interested in hosting or facilitating a topic. There's so much work being done in this space, and your ideas, your stories, experiences are so worth sharing. We are thrilled to share the mic with you. IDEA Cafe topics are a launching point for further discussion and represent a handful of experiences and perspectives. We just love bringing them to you to get you started, perhaps in your own conversations at your own organizations and gardens. You may agree or disagree, but we hope you will engage in your curiosity to explore and continue the conversation. The goal is to build a community of courageous conversations and create transformation one conversation at a time. So let's talk about burnout. It's something our society has lived with for so long and almost normalized. Often the answer is to self-care our way out of it and set some boundaries, as elusive as those may be. And for some of us, we've probably had the experience of quitting and starting over at someplace else, right? Some other job. When it comes to engaging in idea work, burnout is really high. This is a topic of conversation I've engaged in frequently, and that's why I wanted to host this first conversation or this first IDEA Center sponsored event on this topic. The work feels really high stakes with far-reaching societal implications fueled by desperation for change, but it's often at the expense of our well-being. So does it have to be? So that's why we're here to explore this topic today. We are going to talk about what burnout is, what it isn't, some techniques on how to understand them, but also still live within our integrity. So whether your struggle is with IDEA or not, burnout is burnout, and it doesn't feel like we're living the best version of ourselves. I'm really excited to introduce and welcome Ellen Yale to join us today as our guest speaker. She is a master certified life coach who's been working with clients one-on-one and in groups all over the world for over a decade, helping people to navigate their emotional life, take inspired action, and imagine the next incredible step. You can find her or connect with her through her website at www.ellenyale.com for help navigating in life and learning more about her podcast and all the exciting things that she's doing. I'll make sure I put her website in the chat. Speaking of the chat, this conversation, even though we have guest panelists here today to be coached, please engage in questions or offering up your experiences and your voices in the chat. As Briana mentioned, this cafe is being recorded and it will be available to access afterwards in YouTube in about a week in the IDEA Center's channel in the APGA's YouTube page, but it's also available on the APGA or the association website under the library and resources. I also want to plug the next cafe in December. It was on success stories. It's the lessons learned edition. So be on the lookout for registration, which should be coming out today, but within the next couple days. It's scheduled for December 6th at noon Pacific time or 3 p.m. Eastern. Without any further delay, on behalf of the IDEA Committee and the IDEA Center, thank you again for being here. Let's go ahead and get started. Hello, Ellen, and guest participants. Ellen, I have introduced you, but I want to also now share the floor with our guest coachees today. So I will let Rachel, since you're to the right and upper right of my screen, I'll let you go first, and then I'll let the others follow along.
Hi, my name is Rachel Neal. My pronouns are her, she, and I work at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. I'm also a member of the D&I committee for APGA and participate in the cohort program as well, the DA program out of the Denver Botanic. And I'm the marketing specialist at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, and it'll be interesting to be here and part of this conversation.
I'm Maria Thomas. I'm the curator of plants at the Albuquerque Biopark Botanic Garden in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm also part of the IDEA cohort. And yeah, just excited to be a part of this conversation.
My name is Toshi Yano. I'm the managing director of Earth Equity at the Perfect Earth Project, an organization devoted to changing land care practices in the country. I'm also a director at large at the APGA and co-chair of the IDEA committee.
I'll go next. I'm Adriana Quinones, and I'm the executive director of the Columbus Botanical Garden in Columbus, Georgia. And I am a past co-chair of the IDEA committee, still on the IDEA committee, and I also sit on the board of directors for the association.
Good afternoon, I'm Makale Faber-Cullen, and I am a contract curator of public practice at the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens. So I'm working on their interpretive master plan. I also am building a collection at the Library of Congress. So those are my two roles right now. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much, everyone. Well, we're really excited, and we don't want to waste any time because I think this is going to be one of those very deep conversations, and we've got a lot to cover. I've again shared the YouTube channel in the chat as well as Ellen's website. Ellen, let's get started and let's talk about burnout.
Great.
So what is it? What isn't it?
I sort of wanted to set my intention for the next 90 minutes today. And basically, I want to talk about what society tells us is burnout, and then what actually is causing burnout. Because I think we've been treating something different than the actual cause of the root. And whenever you want to make a change, when you want to make a transformation, you have to know what you're trying to change. So we want to dig down there a little bit and have hopefully a conversation with the whole panel about it. I also want to share my 3 steps I have. Actually, there's 3 solutions to burnout, and then 3 steps. It's a 3-day today. 3 steps for creating boundaries, both for people outside of yourself, and then also setting boundaries for yourself too. So that's sort of my intention. You were just asking, how do you know you have how you know you have burnout? I actually went to the Mayo Clinic, and they have a little list. I just want to see if any of this resonates with you guys. It says, have you become cynical or critical at work? Do you drag yourself to work and have trouble getting started? Have you become irritable or impatient with coworkers, visitors, guests, or volunteers? Do you lack the energy to be consistently productive? Do you find it hard to concentrate? Do you lack satisfaction from your achievements? Do you feel disillusioned about your job? Are you using food, drugs, alcohol, screen time, shopping, or fill in the blank, whatever your buffering agent is, to simply not feel it, not feel all those feelings that come with burnout? Have your sleep habits changed? And are you troubled by unexplained headaches, stomach or bowel problems, or other physical complaints? So that's certainly not a comprehensive list. And it may seem like those are symptoms, but those are actually the results of burnout. That's what happens because you're feeling the cluster of feelings that burnouts
consist of. So that would be things like overwhelmed, or you feel tired or drained or mentally out of energy. So my first question to this group, my panel here, is if you've had burnout or if you're having burnout currently, what does it feel like in your body? And feel free to just speak out in any order you'd like.
I'd like to jump in. I think in this industry in particular, especially for those who are out in the field, burnout can feel physically debilitating, especially at this time of year. You come home from work after being in the garden, doing fall cleanup after a long year on the East Coast, a drought-ridden, really stressful year, and you feel, I felt like I just want to go to sleep, have a beer and go to sleep. And so, just to speak up for folks, who are actually doing physical labor out there, there's a huge proponent of physical burnout, component of physical burnout in the horticulture industry.
Yeah. And when you're feeling burnout, Taji, where do you feel it in your body personally? Because it's different for different people.
Yeah, that's a funny question. Often that depends on what I've been doing in the garden, right? So it could be in my hips, it could be in my back, in my neck. Depends on whether I'm pruning or, there are sort of, physical elements related to work, but that get amplified, I think, when I'm feeling particularly at the end of my rope.
Yeah.
I can jump in because I can remember a couple times, some maybe not so far behind me, but where there was this really physical manifestation that I didn't realize was part of the burnout. And that was, I started having pain in my shoulders and in my back. It's been a while, Toshi, since I was out in the garden working like that. So it wasn't hard labor, but I thought something was so wrong with me that I went to a chiropractor, and eventually I switched that job, and it was like a miraculous thing. The pain went away, and, just from switching the job. So
I can jump in. For me, it's more mental too. I will have a really long day, and I'm on the DEI committee here as well at work. And sometimes when that word disillusionment popped up in my mind, I'll get really frustrated, and you'll go home and we've done a lot of really good work. And then I feel like I've taken 2 steps back if something has happened. And for me, it's just I could be outside after work going for a bike ride or a walk, and it's a real struggle to actually continue on with, a fun activity because I am so drained and tired, or getting myself to even cook dinner.
I tend to have a loss of focus where even after work, I'll catch myself trying to work through things and, in my head, and realize I'm quite possibly missing some of the most important moments in my life with my family because I'm still caught in the moment of trying to get through the problem solvings of the day before that, 2 days from now. And I get pretty intense migraines as a result. And I've actually been doing a lot of physical therapy for the past probably 1.5 years, trying to get them under control. And then I get a lot of fatigue, and it's almost like when I come in the mornings and I open my email, and it's very close to anxiety, the feeling of just this overwhelming, and so it begins again sort of feeling. So I think that's where I'm at.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I intentionally said I was a contractor because one of the things that I engage in is sort of being of and not of the institution. So when I come in, I bring energy. People look to me to connect and maybe download, and so cumulatively that becomes a challenge, and it's more of an isolating position because I both see the burnout of the staff maybe that I work with at different institutions, public gardens, and then I am both an outsider, so I'm entrusted with information, and then I kind of broker a bridge kind of these two worlds. And so I find that taxing. And as a Black woman, I think we're expected to be strong, right? And hold that, because we do often, and it's kind of a hidden emotional labor. And I think, I've also done, worked as a gardener, a seasoned gardener. So I appreciate you, Toshi, for actually talking about the work, right? But I would say you feel it. It's a kind of general, I felt it like it's kind of respiratory for me. I find it's, I just have to practice breathing. But that's where I feel it. It's a kind of, it almost like, it literally, like people say, people take the oxygen out of the room, but sometimes it really feels that way, that I can't hold space for myself in some of this work sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how it's so different for different people. And as I'm looking over in the chat, we're just seeing a lot of different things, from back, shoulder, tension, brain fog, agitation, feeling lost, feel it in their chest. I mean, it's just shows up a lot of different places. It can be things like your blood pressure changes. A lot of people find that they're having to take medicine for burnout because of the different physical things that are happening. Insomnia is a big one that I'm hearing a lot for people with burnout. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and had your mind racing about something? Headaches is another one that we'll hear about a whole lot. And just the buzzwords stressed and anxious, but at a whole different level and sort of a chronic type of level. Something else I want to mention too is that you may have burnout, or you may have depression, or a lot of people have both of them. So I just want to say that depression is something that needs to be treated on a professional level. You want to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist for depression, but that doesn't mean you don't have burnout. Sometimes when you treat with drugs, you aren't then treating the actual core of what's causing whatever the burnout is. So I do want to say, if you do think you have depression, please go and talk to a professional about it. There's a lot of different ways they can help you through talking or through drugs, but don't ignore the burnout part of it too. So we've talked about how it feels in your body and some of the results that you have from it, like procrastination. Sometimes people end up being passive aggressive because of burnout. They might set unrealistic expectations. Like I can do this in this amount of time. And that's one of the things we think is causing it. So much of the time is when you have too much to do in too little of a time. So I'd also like to stop and just go around the panel one more time. And I'd love it if you would share how burnout has affected your life and affected the people that you know.
Well, I wanted to jump in just real quick, because there was something that came up also in the chat that resonates with me, right? Is especially when you're doing work that feels so critical and urgent right now, there's a large emotional part to this, but it's like this edge of apathy sometimes. And I try to balance being passionate, but also slightly dispassionate, because otherwise, if I'm putting all my passion and energy into this, I will get to a point where I just don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't want to read another article about racism. I don't want to it gets to where you just don't feel like you have any usefulness left to give because you're just all your passion there. So I have been doing a lot of work on just being slightly dispassionate, but at the same time, it's still this constant work. But I just kind of wanted to share that apathy is a thing, because I have talked to folks, because that is, Makale, you talked about being in an entrusted space and being a person of color as well, where people reach out to you and they want to confide in you or they want to connect in you. And I've have very similar. So I've had a lot of conversations with individuals, and I'm hearing these things like, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. I just want to do my job. I don't want to do this extra stuff anymore. It's like they're at the end of their rope on this topic. And
I'm
this is
thinking maybe
something that's gonna
apathy
go on.
might be a good time to think, oh, I need to set some boundaries too. Like maybe that's a trigger that you could set for yourself. But you've just said so many good things there. Well,
Didn't mean to jump in on everybody else, but yes, I wanted to go ahead and let everybody else. I think Rachel, you might have been about to
No,
say
I was just
something.
saying I'm at the I'm passionate, and I think I was going to say my family just doesn't want to hear about it anymore. They come home and they're just like, can we talk about something else? So I think too, I tend to like, I have to drive that boundary to my work, to my home life as well.
Yeah, I often do this thing where I purposefully shield, the people that are important in my life from the stuff that's affecting me. And sometimes I think it's helpful because I don't want to just dump on people. And then sometimes I think it's horrible because it's sort of cutting off an aspect of what I'm going through from them, and they feel like I'm lost somewhere, or I'm not being communicative. And so yeah, that's a huge part of it, is how burnout affects the people that are close to you as well.
I think part of the difficulty too is like, I mean, I've heard the term like hustle culture. Like, my generation is very much like constantly trying to achieve one more thing. And if we're not willing to pull ourselves back, then we're failing somehow. And so that, again, like how it affects the people around me and my family is, at work, I think it kind of pulls people in along, like, well, let's just do this one more thing. And that they're kind of like, well, I love you to death, but I'm going to kill you. Stop now. And then just at home, just by the time I get there, I feel like, just so overworked. It's just like you said, that kind of escape right into the Netflix, or like I go for the 3-mile walk at the park with the headphones on, and I'm not really like engaging. I have to like consciously disengage with everything around me in order to like maintain a little bit of sanity. So
yeah.
I would just say that I feel like there's something structural too, where there's a kind of virtuosity in nonprofits and in public gardens, where you're like working more by the heart than by the hour, and it's like scarcity mentality, and we're doing this, like pushing like the growing edge, like this is, like Maylin, you were saying, like put your whole self into it, and it's kind of expected, often, especially like when I was a seasonal gardener, it's like, you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, like you just like pushing, and then you're doing research and like, looking for new varietals. It's just a cultivars. It's a lot, and it's encouraged, and that some of it's enthusiasm, right? A love of plants. And, but also I think, a lot of people like are working in institutions that don't pay well and don't hire enough people. And, it's just like you're like existing in a situation that's untenable, right? And then layer on top of that, all the things, the dynamics, interpersonal dynamics between, hierarchically, like between managers and, folks and staff members across departments. And, I think I try to remember like to kind of get some spaciousness from that. And I can do that, sometimes more easily, sometimes it's more difficult as a contractor. And that's part of the burnout for me too, is like, it's also hard to enter into full-time roles sometimes in public gardens. And so I think there's some burnout with that too. I think I've observed that in colleagues as well, but just wanted to note that it'd be nice to move away from that culture, right? Of kind of celebrating being so busy, like you were saying, Maria, right? Like you're on the hustle, you're like, I'm so busy, I have so many meetings, I'm like this. And it's like, I don't aspire to that. And that's okay, because you can aspire to walk in the world in a different way and do things of quality, not necessarily quantity. Like, I say that as a New Yorker, right? I'm super ambitious and do a lot of work all the time, and Tosha, you too, like, so the East Coast, East Coast drive. Anyway, that's it.
I think there's something go ahead, Toshi.
I was just going to piggyback off that just to say, that whole thing about working in the nonprofit world and trying to change the world. We feel like we almost have to sacrifice ourselves to get what we want accomplished, which isn't always the healthiest. It probably, Ellen, you can tell us if that's a healthy attitude or not. And I think that sort of can compound everything. You don't want to stop. You don't want to, because you feel like you're letting people down or letting something down. So that's a big part of it, Makale. I think there's something to that, plus the hustle culture.
Yeah.
I think also that we, as an industry, we tend to honor and celebrate those who are so passionate and so putting everything that they got on the table. We look at those as our heroes. We celebrate those people. Those are the ones we're all talking about, and I'm just as guilty, and I'm sure there's people right here that are just as guilty. We love those people, and we think they're the ones who really have it because they're so passionate and they're so doing all the things. And I know for me, I got into this career when I still had young children, and I couldn't do all the things. I still had to like raise my kids and go to school. I was going to school with kids, and there's some moments where I almost feel bad that like I don't have the pedigree that other people have, or these kinds of things that I didn't go to the certain programs that are celebrated, and I just got a degree, and and so we tend to celebrate those people. And then when you're trying to do that also, and also as a woman of color, you got, or any person of color, you got that on top of it too, because now you've got something to prove that, that you're different and that you deserve to have this seat at the table. And it can be exhausting. And I think that's part of the problem, is that we tend as an industry to celebrate the people who are doing that very thing. And then we feel guilty because maybe we don't feel like we're doing enough.
You all have just done such a beautiful job of helping me with that, of sharing what we're all experiencing, and especially amongst yourselves. And you've teed up totally to talking about the three choices we have on creating a solution, because usually people want out of burnout. And that's one of there's a motivational triad that humans have. And one of the motivations is to escape pain. So we're feeling this burnout and we want to escape it. And you really have three choices. The first one is you can keep struggling, doing just what you're doing, and just you're aware you've got burnout. And I know it might seem crazy, but some people have reasons they want to keep doing things the way they're doing. Some people just might want to use their burnout to help them leave the situation they're in. They want to use it as a motivator. Most people, though, just want to not have the burnout. So the second choice you have to make is to change the situation you're in. And there's just a variety of ways you can change the situation you're in. But the only problem with that, and I will say that first, if you can change your situation, please do it. If you can make it less stressful, go for that, because that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the easy way to do it. And we'll be talking a little bit about setting boundaries. A lot of times you can use boundaries really effectively to change the situation, the circumstances. Like if you have a big project you're working on and you're trying to fit 10 hours worth of work into 8 hours, if you can, delegate or set some boundaries, do that. But the only problem is a lot of times you're not in a position where you can change the external things. So the third choice you have is to do the same things, but not feel burned out. So none of these three choices are right or wrong. Sometimes you can do more than one, but you can either change what's outside of you, change what's inside of you, or just leave things the same. So let me circle back around to the third one, because I think that's the one that is tantalizing, because it's the one that most people don't hear about. And that is to change what you think. Because, like I said, if you can change things that are outside of you and, make it, wave your magic wand or talk to people or leave your job or take a promotion or, change who you work for, those are all beautiful. But we've so often, you all are smart people and probably have tried a lot of different things. And if those aren't working, then you can change like how you view what's going on. And it's perfect what you all were talking about before, like the change the world spirit can go two different ways, because it definitely can cause burnout, because changing the world is a huge goal. But it's also could be something that would make you feel less burnout, because it is a huge sort of spiritual thing that can lift you up and buoy you, even when your back is hurting and you're working your fingers to the bone. There's dirt underneath your fingernails. Does that make sense so far?
Sounds very counterintuitive, but yes. Sounds easier said than done.
Exactly.
Right.
So if there's one thing I would hope you would take away from this webinar, it's that feeling burnout, the emotional part of it, and in turn, the emotions usually cause the physical things that go along with it. Like we say, intensify it, or we feel it in all different parts of our body that we may not even be working. I've just lost my train of thought.
It happens. I do it all the time.
Ellen, I have a question for you.
Yes.
You were talking about sort of changing our perceptions of these things. Do you have any strategies or techniques that you recommend for doing that kind of thing? It's one thing to sort of say, oh yeah, just change your mind, right? But to actually have like techniques, like in meditation, it's helpful to have mantras or that put you in a place. Are there techniques like that
Yes.
you find helpful, that your clients find helpful?
Yeah. The first one is to figure out, and this sometimes can be hard, but you need to figure out what you're thinking that's causing the pain. So for example, if the thought is, how would you say I'm going to change the world? Or how would you actually think that thought as you're working for a nonprofit? Just in those terms, I'm changing the world, or?
Oh, so like if I'm a gardener or something, I'd say, oh, this plant combination, this garden is going to be so beautiful, people are going to be blown away, on that level. Or if maybe you're not a gardener, maybe you're the director of the garden, and you say, oh, people are going to come here and they're going to see a new way of looking at the world.
I'll jump in on the direct.
Yeah. Through the series of gardens.
No, you're right. Like I'm a pure horticulturist, classically trained, but now I run a garden. So, I think about like, oh, we're going to make this new program for kids. They're going to be able to, touch a worm. They never got to touch a worm before or something. My educator is going to come up with this amazing program. All these kids are going to be able to come that never came. And that literally, to me, is changing the world.
Yeah. And part of the issue is that it's an infinite thought. And if it's motivating everything without getting down to what's actually causing the burnout, it's going to continue to cause burnout. Because you always, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say that I think there's a scarcity about it as well, right? It's if I miss this one kid who might be the next Einstein, if this one it's like you're trying to we cast such like kind of wide nets, and in our missions we really do talk about changing the world, right, and changing how people relate to plants, and then how we elevate people's well-being, but also the science and climate change, right? Like we have such big and broad missions that literally have things like change the world in them. And so we take that on. And so we tend to feel like if that one plant is out of place, we're going to ruin somebody's aesthetic, and they're not going to get that emotional connection, or that one children's program that's not going to hit the right kid at the right time. So I think we put that burden on ourselves. And then we feel like we failed.
And can I say also, there's a lot of identification with the institution that you work for as well, which as a director, for sure, I know you feel that, Adriana, and I felt that. But even as a staff member, as a horticulturist, especially, a passionate one, I think people often find work. They go out and seek work at the gardens that they want to work at. And if they get that job, they feel sort of, not just an association, but as an identification with that spot. And I think, you don't want to rock that boat. You don't want that plant in the wrong place, as Maylin put it, and that can lead to sort of, I think a couple different types of burnout. And one is sort of, you don't want to communicate things that may not feel right. And so you bottle those up, and that becomes something. And then there's also just sort of like, you feel like you have to be a representative of the institution as well, which has its own sort of heavy weight or burden. Yeah,
I think you've really narrowed it down, because it's when you are allowing yourself to be motivated by your global mission and don't stop and take a look at exactly what is going on that's causing the burnout, then you'll always be run by the global mission. Like you can use the global mission as fuel, as motivation, but you'll burn out if you use that, because you can't save everyone by showing them everything that can be done, because the possibilities are infinite. But that's why I jotted down, like, the painful thought might be, if I miss this one kid. Because if you stop and think about it, you physically can't change every single kid who might come, or every single person who possibly could come. And that's going to cause burnout. And again, with your thinking mind, but you don't stop and think about that particular thing that's causing the burnout. So it's really taking that step back and saying, because it's going to be different, all those different painful thoughts, and there's usually a cluster of them. There's usually not just one, especially with something like, I want to help the world, I want to change the world. You have all these different ways that you can do it. But if you take a look at each one and see what's painful, that's what you can take a look and change. Maylin, you?
Yeah, I want to address a couple questions that have come up in the Q&A that are around this, right? And one is, can burnout come from the environment and the culture you're in? And there's a second one that's around that similar situation, right? So like we talk about, like Ellen, do you see clients that focus on changing their internal situation when actually they should work more on changing the external situation, or vice versa? Right. So I think that is something that we are also speaking to in the IDEA space when it comes to equity, inclusion, diversity, accessibility. And we talked a little bit about the paradigm earlier, right? It's like literally we got to get the shirt off our backs in nonprofits. And so here we are trudging along trying to save the world on a shoestring. That's a lot of pressure that we put on, but sometimes a lot of that has to do with also the culture that we're in that continues to create and support that paradigm. And a lot of the conversation when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility has to do about shifting culture and changing culture. So I think that these are two very excellent questions about internal versus external, and when do you change what?
Yeah. And let me say, and this actually sort of relates back to Maylin, what you were saying about apathy, is when you look at this whole thing as a thinking problem, that allows you to keep certain thoughts and to change other thoughts. So you can still keep the idea, and because it's useful, and that's sort of my criteria for whether you want to keep an idea or a belief or not, is does it serve you? So I think it would serve most people to think, I can change the world. What I'm doing is good. All of those thoughts that make you, and you can tell if it's a serving thought by how it makes you feel. Again, we're back to feeling sensations in our body. I think it's so interesting that the only reason you know you're having a feeling, an emotion, is because you feel it somewhere in your body. We're just not usually tuned into thinking about like, oh, wait, that does, how does excitement feel different than happiness? And the more you get to know how your body feels, the more you'll be able to know how you want to believe things, think things. And so I would keep some of the thoughts that make you feel good. You don't have to abandon them or tone them down, but by looking to see what the thoughts are, usually when you change what you're thinking, then that's what creates the external change. So like by deciding how you're going to want to shape your life, who you want to be, what sort of transformation you want to create, then it's going to become obvious what the next step is and what needs to have your focus to change externally.
I just want to say thank you for that, Ellen. I appreciate what you're saying. And I also see it as kind of, reproducing some of the ownership society sort of frames of, that don't serve us, right? Because I can think as a Black woman or Asian man, like, that I can think my way, I can think anything about anything. And like, our parents teach us, like, I am somebody, right? I am a man. Like, that's like the whole civil rights movement, right? We had to tell that to ourselves. And yet still, that didn't allow us access, right? So I think that might serve some people in our community here today. And I just want to acknowledge that thought work, which I do hold and I think is deeply valuable, like these infinite thoughts and what serves us and the psychology of it. But also it kind of sometimes it really doesn't, right? It's not enough, which is why we have had the Civil Rights Act, why we needed, legislation to be put forward, because that our thoughts alone are not going to change what's happening. And sometimes bringing it back from we want to change the world to working with, my colleague in collections and thinking about labels. I mean, we do very practical work, like, okay, well, what's the genealogy of this name of this plant, and how can we expand that so that we tell more stories about the context in which this plant grew, the plant communities it grew with, the humans, the animals that in which this plant like lived. I mean, there are all these stories, right, that we practically try to, kind of shift. And those are really, I mean, that's like in a very practical level trying to get traction, and we often can't do that. So, I mean, and those also contribute to the burnout, like where there's a kind of sense like, well, there's the glacial pace, this is a botanical garden. There are all these reasons why people say we can't move. I just wanted to acknowledge that for, all of the BIPOC people on the call, that we have done that for generations, and it's been, we have to hold both, because I think what you're saying is deeply valuable. We do have to shift our minds, and also we need more than that.
Yeah.
And I also
Go
want
ahead, Ellen.
to tag on to that is that I think it's also important not to use our thoughts to make things okay that are wrong with the culture. Like, not to say to ourselves, well, I'll just change how I think and let other people oppress me. So it can be used that way, but that's not the way to use it to help yourself or anyone else or the culture. So
Yeah,
go
ahead, Toshi.
No, I just wanted to say thank you, Makale, for that. I think that's, I've had relationships in the past where people will say things that feel similar to that, like, oh, you just change the way you look at this and you'll be fine. And I think, Malin, you brought it up earlier, in particular in IDEA work, a lot of these things, a lot of these sort of feelings of burnout are pretty entrenched in the environment themselves, in the institutions, in the culture. And, as Makale said, we can try to rethink those as many different ways as we can. And obviously we will. And sometimes those help. And sometimes, we struggle against them without even knowing that we're struggling. And then there's the double burnout there, Ellen, where you feel like you also can't leave the environment itself, because the environment is the ground that you're walking on in this, in this culture. So you can't, both all the different thought experiments that you're doing to try to change and shift your attitude within the culture are failing, and then the culture itself is failing you as well. And so that kind of double burnout, I guess, or double sort of failure can feel really debilitating at times. And then we end up with that third option, right, Ellen, when we feel like we can't do anything, and that's our option. And it's not really an option, right? It's just sort of like, it just feels horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say that, like, listening to all of this, like, I feel like it's almost multiple levels that we're talking about, because, we talked a little bit about like the idea that, like, all of this pressure that is on us, like, we are saving the world, this is the work we want to do. And it's like, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like, that's way up here. But so much of us are way down here dealing with that cultural burnout. And for me, that's the hardest part, because I do feel like, as my position where I'm at, I'm kind of managing the burnout of my staff, beneath me, but also I'm managing upwards, like from the executive level coming down. And so I'm kind of stuck in this, like, grind of expectation and delivery. And so that, I think, is what's so complicated when you get into the culture, and, like, how do we change that? So part of it is, this idea of, like, well, maybe, there was this quote that I read recently, and it says, have a mind that is open to anything and attached to nothing. And so that's kind of part of that idea where, you don't let those feelings live inside your body or inside your head, but still, like, trying to develop the tools to successfully navigate, these feelings and create effective change, so that, it's better for the next person, it's better for the people you work with on all levels. And I think that that's where I'm at, as far as that, like, kind of pyramid of the ideal. And I would love to be at a point where I was experiencing burnout with that lofty ideal of saving the world. But instead, I feel like I'm way down here in the weeds, trying to navigate just day-to-day cultural activity within the organization. And that's, I think, the difficult part, because we all love what we do. And so we don't want to just, give up or go away. You know what I mean? We're really so passionately devoted to being here and showing up every day, but then that's the toll, is, so how do we manage that, I think?
Well, I want to bring something up too, because there's another element to, I think, this work that I've been really observant of, and I've just been, and I say observant, and it's mostly of myself. I realized that a lot of the frustration that I was having, and when I was getting to that point of apathy, it was because I was almost measuring my progress based on somebody else's reaching or understanding what it was that I was trying to impart, right? It's like, I just need them to change this one thought and they're never going to get it. And, like, yay. And then it's like on to the next one and next one. And I kept putting so much of my own success or my own feelings of, I don't know if it's success, but fulfillment even, or that maybe this work I'm doing is worth it, right? Is on somebody else's journey, that they're going to progress along. And when I recognized that I was doing that, and the more I started hearing other conversations and having conversations with others, I was hearing the same thing. This frustration that we have within our institutional cultures, that they go through this change and they finally get it, right? And they are able to go through this transformation. If they just thought differently, or if they just did, it doesn't mean that I don't continue to do the work or talk about what I do. This is where my dispassion or my detachment is, well, your journey is none of my business. I've gotten to that point. And I can just only give however much I can give and share, and the rest is up to others. I think, Rachel, you and I have had this conversation, because that was where a lot of my burnout was starting to come from, was on somebody else's
And that's
journey.
exactly what I've come to the realization in the last, month or so. And I've had, very people that I really respect tell me that you can't worry about someone else's journey. Everybody is in their own journey, and the best I can do is try to share and do as much as I can to make people see things, or educate, but that's the best I can do, is just continue doing the work that I'm passionate about. And then how others react to it, I can't get caught up in that, because it does burn you out.
And we live in a very individualistic society, right? Especially specifically, I think, and that's not for, I think for certain and definitely different communities, we do exist in community and we have people to share. But I think that that's also where things are in a really interesting space right now, where we're processing things based on our identity and our individualism, and not in that space of kind of community. So I feel like sometimes that even has a sense in itself of taking, right? And it's just compounding a lot of that, because our identities are sitting with it. Yet I am looking at an extraordinary group of people right now who are being vulnerable and courageous and sharing. And I'm appreciative of you so much for being here and opening up this way. But yet I'm looking at a community of individuals and going, I'm not alone. You all are not alone. And that in itself is kind of elevating some of, I think, the tension or the pressure that I feel individually in my own personal purpose in life and my own mission, right? As an individual existing in this space. I don't know if that resonates with anybody else. But that was, and I bring this back to you, Ellen, because that was the thought I had to change. Was that something that I was going to say, I'm responsible for changing somebody else's mind? Is that on us was on me.
Yeah. And another tip for doing the internal part of this work is just to pick something very small to change about how you think. Because a lot of people go for the big thought, and it's really hard to like some people want to say, I want to think I don't have burnout. And it's like, well, you can't really do that because you're not going to believe it. When you're choosing something different to think, it's got to be something that's just as true or truer than the original thought that was causing you pain. And it doesn't have to be something big. In fact, what usually it's like, is it Jenga, where you have all the different little blocks and you pull out some, and when you finally get enough of the blocks pulled out, the whole thing falls. If you work on the small things that are causing you pain, then a whole lot will then tumble as your brain starts to realize you aren't supporting that thought anymore. So that's just a tip on how to approach it. But there's also setting boundaries and asking other people to change, or letting them know you're not going to change. And I have 3 steps in changing boundaries, because it's a little different than traditional setting boundaries. The first part is what most people do, and that is to make a request. So maybe you want someone to do what they'd said they were going to do. You can ask them to do it. Sometimes they'll do it, sometimes they won't. You can threaten them, but that's not really part of setting a boundary. But the first part is a request. The second part is to come up with a consequence. And the tricky part is the consequence needs to be something that you can do as the person who is requesting it. Only because, unfortunately, we have no control over other people. As much as I'd like to give you that magic, I don't have it. So you really don't have any power unless it's with yourself. Again, otherwise it's a threat. So my favorite example is, say you get into someone's car and they're smoking cigarettes and you just can't be in there if they're smoking cigarettes. You can ask them not to smoke, but it's their car. They don't necessarily want to stop smoking. And so you can say, I'm wondering if you would mind not smoking. Otherwise, I'm going to have to get out of the car. So that's something you have control over. You can't control them. Then the third part is what's usually hardest for most people, and that is to then enforce the consequence. So if you say you're going to get out of the car, they do smoke, then you do get out of the car. So how could you apply that to something that's going on with your boundary setting right now, with your burnout?
I'll try to jump in and try to give a real world example.
Great.
So being in a leadership position, there's times when you have people, I have people above me and people below me, right? I have a board and I have staff. And then something's not going right. Maybe it's a staff person, it's not going right. And so I have to say, you got to stop doing that, whatever that is. And here's what's going to happen if you don't. And, you know, it doesn't have to be drastic. It doesn't have to be like you're going to get fired or something like that. It's not, but it could be, it could be something where they lose some kind of privilege, or to be able to make those choices. A good one would be like, you're not punching out in the time clock, right? Or you're kind of fudging your numbers. Well, now you're not going to be able to use your phone anymore. You're going to have to use the actual finger thing. I know that's a simple one, but like that's a real thing. Like no one wants to use the finger thing. So, there's things like that, but then it's also can be even harder things like situation. I'll try to keep it really general, but maybe you're having some problems with board, or if you're not at the executive level, maybe it's your manager or something like that. And, and it's just against everything you believe in. So you say, look, I can't work under that. And if you don't fix that, then I may not have a place here anymore. And that's a really hard one to enforce because no one wants to do that. So I think those are kind of a couple things that might happen in the public garden, or anytime you're dealing with other people, where you have to kind of stand up and say, draw a line in the sand almost. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but
yeah. Do you find it harder to set the boundaries with the people who are working for you or the board?
I would say for me, it's the board for sure. Because, now you're talking about my job, right? So
yeah, just to jump in, Adriana, just to jump in on that, there's a question in the chat. Somebody just brought up that says, can you give an example in a work dynamic with a power differential from a subordinate's perspective who is having to set boundaries with those above them?
That's great.
It's easy enough to say like, oh, in your friend's car, like, oh, I don't want you to smoke cigarettes, and to say I'll leave. I mean, I know that's a benign example in some ways, but to set what are your suggestions to setting boundaries with an inappropriate boss or somebody who doesn't have like a
the clout.
Or how do
Yeah.
you even just say no to your boss? Like even on a
Well,
simple thing, right? Sometimes like
yeah,
it doesn't even have to be something inappropriate. I think sometimes we just struggle with just saying, no, I don't want to work this Saturday, or whatever it is.
I think, and I'm sure Ellen has much more better answers than I, but my whole thing is communicate what it is and why you're having trouble fulfilling what your boss is asking you to do. And you generally speaking, you're not trying not to do something just to be a jerk. You're trying, you have a real reason why it goes against something you thought, or maybe it's they're asking a very unreasonable thing for your life experience and what's happening in your life. And there's lots of things it could be, but I think that if what happens a lot of times, at least in my experience, is that people have a reaction and they have something that they need to say to their boss. Something's unreasonable. They've got to set this boundary. Like, I have kids and I can't work every single night at this special event, right? Or something, that's a reasonable thing to say. But if your boss isn't hearing it, then and doesn't understand it, and you're not having the conversations, and you're just saying, my boss is a jerk and they're making me work every night, but you never actually talk to them about it. I don't know what other people are like. I only know what I'm like. And I would want to hear it, and I'd want to try to figure out a way to make it work for both. Because, ultimately, I don't want staff to burn out either.
And I feel like there's an art to finding a way to say no in a way that is not disrespectful, not insubordinate, that really kind of still feels like I'm here willing to do the work, but in this instance, I need to set this boundary. And I think that's the difficulty, especially for me coming from kind of a middle management place. But when I saw that question typed in the chat, that's, pretty much exactly why I agreed to be on this panel, because there is an artistry to that maybe I'm not comfortable with at this point. And yeah, I think most of us are put in that position, hopefully not every day, but, frequently, so that is a huge component of burnout, is being unable for whatever reason to say no.
I agree, Maria. I'm trying not to, today's a hard day. So I'm living this right now. So I think that that's exactly it. And it's a job of the person in charge to set the tone for the people below you, so that they feel comfortable, that they feel that they can actually say something, and that you can have conversation. Because the worst thing is to have this power thing where like your boss is just the God, and everything is that they say is what goes, and no one gets to question it, right? That would be the worst situation, and people will leave for sure, because no one wants to work under that, no matter who you are. So, that whole work dynamic, the power differential, that's up to, everyone's got to work on making that not be a thing. Because the reality is, you can't run a garden. One person can't run a garden. Everyone is just as important as everyone else. And you've got to somehow make that differential not be a thing, because that will cause burnout. And that goes with even at the executive director level. Your board can cause you to have burnout because they have unrealistic expectations, and they say this is what you have to do.
I would say that, as a consultant working with a lot of staff members, and it's sometimes you just, some Hort departments are just run militaristically, right? Like that's just real, and it's like rank and file, and you follow the orders, and and I think that's shifting culturally, but I would say like two examples. One of it was a new exhibition that focused on the plants of a particular community in our neighborhood. And plants and people have moved across this globe, mainly driven by economics, European economics. Like, there are stories to that, right? And so in order to tell a complete story about some of these plants, that was people wanted to include that in the narrative, right? And I think there was a push down about that because of, kind of wanting to appease. And there's a lot of like, wanting to appease certain trustees or, maybe these are real people, maybe not, it's like sometimes personal politics gets mixed in and sometimes it doesn't. And I think one of the things that I've observed is that people, as a tactic, also, they question, like one of the things that you're taught, like in anti-racist kind of settings, is to just say, I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch what you were saying. What was that? And then they, that was something that I've noticed at Two Gardens, and you kind of get them to kind of repeat sometimes the atrocious thing that they're actually saying. I've done that. I've asked for clarification on things that have been that are nuanced and highly politicized and uncomfortable. And I'm just like, oh, and I can quite catch that. I'm sorry, I don't really understand, what's happening. And then they lay it out and it's very clear. But what's happening, and then the conversation, you have kind of different problems, maybe better problems, and that's worked. I also, as a boundary, when you can always, so unions and, kind of, you say you don't work at 5 o'clock and then you never take a call after 5 or whatever it is. But I think I had organized, because I was tasked with like trying to kind of break down some of the silos across departments. That's part of the work of co-creation and becoming better listeners and telling better stories. And there was an opportunity for me to, because I've been talking to everyone across departments, I have that level of agility. I was like, great, I have, state soil scientists who've done these soil surveys on our area. And it would be amazing if like these 4 people from Hort and these arborists and the marketing person and the copywriter, and I was pulling people from development, and it was like all these people hadn't been in the room together before. And, I got called out for, being out of my lane, and was told I had convened pretty prestigious scientists, right, to kind of deliver a really interesting kind of conversation. And then I was excited because I knew that these are all really super smart people that would then, their minds would start going, right? And they'd start talking to each other. And that's the whole point of the work, right? And I was like, we can do this in real time. We don't have to wait until we send the report to the funder or whatever. So, and I was called out for that and told, that, I'm not, it was just like, it was very political. And so my boundary to maintain the integrity of my relationships with these scientists, and also as a consultant, I have to continue those relationships after I leave, was to say, oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize that and I'm going to tell you, every single person I invited was super excited to participate in this. And it was just, one person who was uncomfortable with it because it was about co-creation. And I said, I told all the people, my colleagues, my scientist colleagues, I was like, this is what's happening. And I pulled the meeting. Because I was like, I did that, and it was a sacrifice, right? Because I knew that would be the better thing for the staff. And yet they weren't ready. And I knew those people would get reprimanded. And I didn't want to put myself in that compromised situation with these soil scientists who I work with regularly. And it was really sad. And I was disappointed and I was frustrated. And yet I had people texting me saying, oh, you got called out for being out of your lane. That's what happens when you're doing good work. You know that you're doing something that's pushing the growing edge because people are uncomfortable. But it was, and then that's a kind of, one thing that I think it's Catherine Calloway said in the chat, she was talking about a we, and I think, sometimes, hopefully those people, I wish I could say they were my colleagues, but, they're clients, but, they are colleagues also they work with can, kind of have conversations in community. But I know I just kind of tried to maintain my integrity and my boundaries in that moment. And I pulled something of value, and that was painful to do, but I it was, in the moment, and I think it was the right thing to do. And I was able to, I had to get perspective from the politics of the institution, which are, they're unhealthy. And I could see that. And everyone can see that, right? This happens across institutions. It's not unique. There's a protocol for things that sometimes is, antiquated, and it also doesn't serve, the culture they're trying to, reach forward. So sometimes these boundary settings are uncomfortable, right? And you have to have uncomfortable conversations, and you have to try things, right? And sometimes your reaction has a consequence, right? Yeah. And that was the consequence to that decision that they made as I pulled the meeting.
And that was something you were able to do, but yet it was painful. I mean, sometimes the consequences are painful because it's something that you're having to do. But, and to go back just a step, sometimes that, I fired them off step 1, step 2, step 3. And if you do have that militaristic kind of framework where you're working, sometimes that's what your bosses have to hear. But a lot of the time, that step 2 of setting the consequence is more of a conversation if the person is higher up on the hierarchy of power, rather than just saying, I'm coming in here, this is what I need from you, this is what I'm going to do if it happens. It can be more like, here's what I would request, and then start the conversation to figure out what it is that maybe you mutually decide would be the consequence. Yes.
Being
Rachel.
a staff person too, just jumping in, I experience this all the time because I often have to work with leadership and we are in a hierarchy. I find too, I have to have like a meeting or schedule something. Email doesn't work. And just being as direct and honest too. And I found that it's scary, but it's also, I'm so not surprised, but I'm always, it's always nice that you are heard. And I think, I've been in situations where I just have gone back and forth with email, and I just wanted to point out that you can get in a black hole with that, and just actually getting in front of that person and having a conversation, I feel like a lot is resolved, but it is a really hard thing to do.
What do you say, Rachel? Like, there's someone who put an anonymous note in, like, what do you do when you've advocated for yourself in the past, but you were told by your higher up that you have to do it despite saying it's too much? And I mean, that kind of suppression, like, what is it? Groups like this? Like, it's not always HR, it's not always the union, it's complicated.
Yeah, I wanted to think about that a little bit too. We're talking a lot about what we can do individually in this webinar so far to sort of work up through burnout. But I think ultimately, like in my perspective, I guess, burnout can often be a collective thing, or it works across groups, and often is not just a result of individual behavior, but institutional behavior. And Makale, you mentioned, we can unionize, you can create, somebody mentioned creating a we in the chat. I think putting together a cohort, a group of people who you can feel comfortable sharing with can often feel, but that it also feels very tentative and sort of tenuous at the same time, and dangerous as well. It can be, unionizing or, creating a support group can often feel like you're challenging authority, and that something, it can come down on you as well. So I know people are executive leadership, middle management, and all of us have been staff. I know that. So it's, I wonder what space there is for sort of, coalition building to challenge or to work through burnout.
One thing that we're working on here at the biopark, which it's a work in progress, so I can't measure success at this point, but we put together a strategic pillar, we have 4 pillars in our strategic plan, and one of them is our people, because there was so much of these issues coming up. We're such a diverse entity. We have zookeepers, we have people raising endangered silvery minnow fish for the Rio Grande, we have our botanic garden, and we have fishing ponds. So we're raising conservation fish, and then we're also letting fishermen take fish out of the pond. So it's as diverse as that. And so one of the things that we've kind of put together is like our people pillar. And they have a group that meets regularly and kind of tries to funnel these things through to executive leadership, so that it's coming from a point of the community, like the internal community, and not as one individual trying to make a request, lay down a consequence, and then enforce the consequence in a way that seems untenable when you're dealing with the, kind of the stratigraphic layers of our facility. And like I said, it's a work in progress, but it really does seem to give our internal staff more of a voice, and that kind of cohesion and support that they feel like they need to bring some of these issues to the surface, and then, kind of stare them down and try to address them. So again, I can't quite measure success yet, but it's been an interesting trial run here. And I really do feel like, when people have that opportunity, it's like unionizing, like you said, but in a less kind of organized sort of way. And it really kind of, much like what we're doing here today, creates a space to allow that voice to be heard.
I just love what you said, Maria, about creating a people pillar.
Mm.
Actually, I think every single organization within our membership should create a people pillar, and it probably should be the central pillar, right? That all else gets built upon, even though we're plant people and we love, our connection, and we talk about that with communities, and we try to build that in our communities, right, and with our visitors. But I think when we're trying to also affect change that we're trying to make societally and outwards, we forget that within an institution, there has to be some way to support the people doing this work. There has to be, and the people doing all your work, right? Every person with an organization, whether horticulturist, marketing, technology, HR, if you have it or don't have it. I loved how somebody called that out, that not every organization, we deal in some very small organizations sometimes that don't have HR, right? So we don't have official channels. That I think sometimes we don't look at the measure of our health and our thriving as an organization by looking internally within our own people. So I think this is such a great opportunity, and for those who are listening and participating to really think about that and voice that, because that is something within an organization where you have, and hopefully you can create them if you don't have them, allies within your organization to build up these kind of trusted people and trusted kind of coalitions, whether they're within your organization or also broader, right, within the community. So because I think that the burnout that's happening also in this space has a lot to do with isolation. Individuals at one institution, right, who are in that space of feeling like they're holding up the world, and that they're not connected to a whole community of people who are trying to do this work. And so I think that there is and what I like about this conversation, and we can't predict these things, which is you all are sharing your shared experiences and the things that have helped you or things that you're learning, but we're also learning about the internal work as well, which is, yeah, we also have a place at this, and not everything is external, and we can't just do the blame thing, right? Because at some point, I've been in this space of burnout in the past. And my burnout, like Ellen was talking about, was part of my struggle, because I was in a different environment, in a different industry, going from one job to the next, and finally realizing, oh, it's actually, I'm not in the right industry. Like I need a career change. that made all the difference. But I had to kind of go, and I was sitting in that burnout and going after it over and over again as a way to process and to figure things out, to figure out where I needed to be. And that's a little bit different, I think, than in this space, because a lot of the people here already know that this is what they're passionate about. But I am here to tell you that at some point, when you get to a place where this is not working with you and you're constantly fighting, and you have to really look within to figure out where your limit is and what kind of life you want to live, and what kind of changes you're willing to make. And so I just want to put that out there as well, kind of to add to the conversation, that this is all very complex. And so I just appreciate all of the stories that are shared. Ellen, did you have anything else? I know we have about 8 minutes left. And I wanted to kind of give you space because you've been listening and absorbing. Was there anything else that you wanted to offer?
Well, just because we have so many different kinds of burnout that we've been talking about, and I'm just so grateful to everyone on the panel who's been able to bring out all these different aspects of it. Just as you're thinking about it and taking steps forward, I find it's really interesting to think about, I'll ask myself, like, who do I want to be? Because that often shapes who I'm going to be in that situation, whether it's a group situation as far as cultural burnout, or if it's with another individual or someone above me in the chain. And then also asking myself, am I in my integrity? You know, am I telling myself the truth about myself? Am I one cohesive unit? I find both of those are just help recenter me when I go to decide what to do about situations like burnout. So, and I wanted to see if there were any questions. I know Malin, you've been nicely monitoring the chat for me. So we may have gotten the questions.
I want to say also to Ellen, thank you for allowing us to be here and somewhat open ourselves up to you and to our association. You know, it's never easy to do these kinds of things, and especially in a public way. So thank you for making it a little easier for us.
Thank you. You all have made it easy for me by being willing, being brave to be here and talk about this subject.
Yeah, and I do think it's a real topic. Burnout's a real thing, and I know the association is working hard to find and make available the resources, because you know, we see a lot of people leave our association, not just our industry. We see people come with high hopes, and then they get burnt out, and then they leave. So you know, hopefully we'll be able to, especially as the IDEA committee, be able to provide some more links and some more resources out there for people.
One thing I wanted to say was, I was just thinking about how much my colleagues and I talk about just getting back to working with plants, and I would often help one of the curators, and you know, the garden, I'd just come in early and just do whatever she needed me to do, because I knew she was overworked, and even though we were kind of in adjacent places, and so much of get back to the pleasure of working with plants. And Rhonda Montgomery wrote this beautiful book called Lessons from Plants, and she's a plant physiologist, Black woman, amazing scientist. And it's been a book that's been really useful for kind of thinking about institutional culture and gardens. She's in the academy, but she also works with a lot of gardeners and kind of horticulturalists. She just, because she understands plant physiology and how plants work in community and, you know, of other plants and soils. It's just, I find that she kind of is able to kind of speak in multiple languages. And I think we all do that, right? Because we kind of communicate with plants and try to listen to them. They're our mentors and our teachers. And I just feel like in a kind of very practical way, I've found that book to be useful as a reference here and there to support me when I'm feeling alone. So I just wanted to put that out there. I'll try to find it on the and put it in the chat.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know we're down to the last couple of minutes. Sorry, I disappeared there for a moment. My internet decided to disconnect, but I'm glad I was able to come back on here and just catch the tail end of this piece. I will say that that one of the greatest and the most rewarding things that I've experienced in this work, having been in it for about 5 years now on the IDEA committee, but then also taking on this role. I'm in it all the time. I have such wonderful conversations, and being in groups like this and then seeing that we had 80 participants here that were live and that so many others are listening in on this. Just knowing that there's so many out there that are experiences, but just talking about it, being vulnerable to share their fears, share their triumphs, share their strategies, approaches, their thoughts. I just have found that hugely rewarding. So I can, in one hand, look at it and go, good God, look at how many of us are suffering. Oh, dear God. Or I can also look at this and just go, oh, wow. So there's so many out here doing this really deep, heartfelt work and with so much passion. And we love the work that we're in. We don't want to leave it. We want to continue to engage. We're here amongst like-minded people. There's so much of this happening, and that's a wonderful thing. And that's, to me, talking about changing the world. This is what changes the world, these conversations. So keep on having these conversations. And I hope that you all out there will use this as an opportunity, maybe to open up a conversation, a real conversation, a safe space, a courageous space in your workplace to just talk about burnout. What can you collectively do to help each other out? You all are not alone. You're in this together. So maybe creating a space for that within your organizations might be just one step. And I just look forward to continuing these conversations and inviting anyone who wants to participate. So I do want to just say thank you again, Ellen, big thank you to you for being here, for listening, for contributing, but also just as much and equally all of you, Toshi, Maria, Rachel, Briana, I know you were listening and you're probably nodding your head a lot in the background. You're always there with me. Adriana, Makale, thank you so much for just sharing your stories, your experiences, and your courage today. Just want to acknowledge that. And then thank you everybody else for joining in. And in those that were contributing resources and their experiences in the chat, you all are awesome. Keep doing that. Keep sharing. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Maylin. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Maylin.